Hi everyone, and welcome to our Datalytics webinar. My name is Sarah Holland, and I'm the web coordinator for today's event. I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items before introducing today's panelists. Today's event will be 60 minutes and will be recorded. The first 45 minutes will be dedicated to showcasing our new solution, Datalytics. We're reserving the last 15 minutes for a question and answer session, so please hold any questions you have until the end. During the event, you'll be able to use the chat box to type questions to our panelists, and we will address those during the Q&A portion. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Speaking today are Brian Matthews, our Senior Vice President of Marketing and Business Development, and Carl Matthews, Vice President of Product Development. Brian, let's get started.
Terrific. Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome our partners who are rolling out Datalytics, our existing Datalytics customers, and eOriginal customers who are interested in how Datalytics will support their specific use cases. Our goals for today are to introduce what Datalytics is, how it works, and examine some high-value use cases which our earliest customers have identified. We'll discuss the platform's extensibility to your particular industry, your role, and your use case. Before getting started, to provide the right context, let me do a quick refresher on eOriginal. For well over a decade, eOriginal has been enabling our customers to digitally transform their business. While our early work centered on digital signatures and e-contracting, in partnering with our customers, we have evolved, where many of you leverage eCore, our digital transaction management platform, to manage your transactions through their full lifecycle, from origination to collateralization or securitization, on into the secondary market, and on to custodians and servicers, all done digitally. Our earliest successes were primarily in the vehicle finance market and have broadened recently into a variety of other asset classes, from equipment lease, solar, vacation ownership, and have a growing footprint in consumer lending and specifically marketplace lending. Additionally, we have launched our expanded digital mortgage platform and are happy to share that earlier this week we announced our first customer, Accenture Mortgage Cadence. Through our eCore platform, we provide full digital transaction management services for financial services. eCore includes robust and differentiated signature capabilities. However, we find many organizations are deploying a single enterprise-wide signature vendor. To accommodate these situations, we offer a flexible and agnostic platform and have deep integrations and working relationships with e-signature companies including DocuSign, Adobe, and others. As you move from signature to e-asset management, eOriginal is recognized best practice leader in providing a robust, tamper-proof chain of custody, ensuring a legally binding authoritative copy through the remaining life cycle of a transaction. One last point. Like many of our innovations, Datalytics was initially conceptualized and built to support a particular business problem for one of our customers. Since then, the concept, the robustness, and the use cases have expanded through collaborations with additional customers, partners, and key third parties, with a particular nod to the CFPB. Now, let me hand it over to Carl to introduce Datalytics. Carl?
Right, thanks, Brian. So I see from the attendees that many are either eOriginal customers today or are partners with eOriginal. And so I'm going to start from a familiar place, and that is with the eOriginal digital transaction management solution, which some of you may know as eCore. And Datalytics really extends eCore, taking a lot of the value that we have around how we manage digital transactions and electronic assets, to extend that to manage the data that is in and about your assets. And you can see that I've added on the slide here some of the types of data that we can store with Datalytics relating to information about your transactions, information about the documents and electronic assets, and information that's actually contained inside those assets and documents. And I'll get into a little more detail on what that could mean in a minute. The real value of Datalytics becomes present when you consider it in the context of your business processes. So the key value, and as I'll show with Datalytics in action in a moment, is where the data that is attached to and associated with your transactions and your documents plays a very important role in supporting the business process and the asset lifecycle. The goal here is really to help improve the efficiency and the quality of the processes attached to your assets and transactions, and we can get into a little more detail of what that means. So the key value with Datalytics is really going to depend on your specific business processes and your environment, but I'm going to hit on a few important points that are generally useful however Datalytics is deployed. Having access to information much more readily about your transactions and the information flow through your business processes can really help provide better information for key performance indicators and key results indicators about how your business is operating. Very importantly, the eOriginal solution with Datalytics provides a single point of access or single source of truth, not just for your electronic assets and your transactions, but all the data that is associated with them. And for many customers, that is a really important point in that the data and the documents are accessible from a single point. With the added value that eOriginal provides in how it manages those electronic assets and transaction information, those same principles are applied to the management of the data that is associated with them. This gives you a much higher level of confidence regarding the information that is stored within the system and really helps ensure the data integrity. Having more access to that information really provides much more transparency what's going on within your business processes. So for many customers, that provides a very key value in itself, simply to be able to have access in real time to find out exactly how your processes are working and what the details are of your transactions. Associated with that and built into Datalytics is the notion of a continuous real-time monitoring, so that you can set up to receive alerts when certain conditions arise. This can really help a lot of processes because it allows correction and action to be taken when certain transactions or documents seem to be out of compliance. For many processes, the action of reporting about the content that is within those transactions and how those transactions are flowing through can be quite an extensive time bucket. So being able to automate the reporting of information as it flows through your processes can be really helpful in both as a time saver and to automate and improve the quality of those processes. When it comes to responding to audits, again, it's really very valuable, and as I'll demonstrate later, to be able to take some findings from an audit and automatically drill down directly to where that piece of information is, so that you can very quickly respond as findings arise. And finally, and a very key differentiator for Datalytics, is that just as there is a fully demonstrable chain of custody for your transactions and your electronic assets, those same principles apply to your data as well. And this is really a very important differentiator from alternative ways of managing data about your transactions, trying to manage those outside in some external system. With Datalytics, because of those principles around ensuring chain of custody, you can have very high degrees of confidence in the quality of the data that's present within your system.
Thanks, Carl. I just want to emphasize a couple of points. One is be out in the marketplace. Everyone we talk to is familiar with KPIs. Not everyone is familiar with KRIs. And many of our customers, depending on where they're at in the industry life cycle, we see KRIs as key risk indicators that they're managing to. Also, while Carl emphasized that really the value here is dependent upon the particular use case, I think the common themes we hear from our customers again and again are really around the value of transparency, the value around speed, the value broadly around compliance, and risk management.
So let me just take a moment to summarize Datalytics is a flexible and comprehensive data management and analytics package that is embedded in eOriginal's robust asset management and workflow platform. It's designed to receive data from document origination systems and systems of record and other business systems that are part of your processes. And the key value it provides is to be the trusted, authoritative system of record for data associated with your transactions and your documents, just as the original system you use today provides that same level of trust and authority for your digital transactions and your assets. So Datalytics has a data exchange and integration API that is built on top of eOriginal's existing robust API set. It has built-in reporting and dashboard capabilities that give you very rich access to charts and other features for analysis, and very importantly, and as I'll show, the ability to drill down to the asset and transaction level. It has built-in monitoring and alerting capabilities should any conditions arise outside of your business processes and your guidance. It has a very sophisticated auditing, encryption, and tamper-proofing functionality that's utilizing what's already trusted within eOriginal systems for your transactions and your assets. And the real value is to provide that level of quality, that chain of custody, and demonstrable compliance around your data at the same high levels as for your transactions and your assets. So Datalytics has a very broad range of possible uses. It really is broadly applicable across markets and across asset classes. So it has applicability in vehicle finance, in mortgage, in marketplace lending, retail and commercial lending, and many other fields. And it plays a role right across the life cycle, from the origination of loans and transactions through to institutional investors, custodians, and servicers. And in fact, one of the real values that Datalytics offers is to provide that level of information flow from one stage of the asset life cycle to another. Now, exactly how you'll use Datalytics and the value that it provides is going to be contingent on your particular circumstances and your particular workflows. But broadly speaking, it would fit in within process automation. So if you're looking to improve compliance, if you're looking to automate and improve quality assurance, if the key value to you is transparency, it will give you unprecedented insight into your business processes and your level of compliance. It will allow you to do auditing and reporting at a much more detailed level and much more streamlined and automated. It will give you actionable analytics that again allows you to drill down rather uniquely to our system to the transaction levels and the documents from within the user interface. The automated alerts are great for immediately knowing when assets or transactions are out of compliance or need attention. And from a due diligence point of view, it allows you to automate and build very sophisticated solutions for understanding at a pre- and post-close point of view exactly what's within an asset pool and to very quickly respond to audit requests and audit findings. So let me move on and show Datalytics in action. And the way that I'll do that is I'll use some slides which really help, I think, explain the message and how the solution will work. So Datalytics is all about data, and that data needs to come from somewhere. And typically it will come from an origination system or a document prep provider, much like the screen that I show on the left here. Now, when a transaction or document is created from that origination system, clearly the documents and transaction information will pass into your eOriginal vault, but also that information that's associated with that transaction and those documents can be passed in as well. And the key to doing that is using the very same robust API that it already exists and is already heavily utilized in order to get transactions and electronic assets into the system. So let me take a moment to talk about the types of data again. So as I mentioned, there's really three classes of data to focus on here. One is at the transaction level. And by metadata, I'm really focusing on information about a transaction, and that tends to fit into different categories as well. One type of data is really system-generated information. It's things like creation dates, transaction IDs, workflow status. Very important for some business processes to understand that. But another level, and perhaps equally or more important, is information about the transaction itself. Information may be relating to the amount of the loan, or the term, interest rates, the state or county where the transaction is taking place. And another very interesting class of information relates to the participants in the transaction. You know, the credit rating of the customer or their demographics. This information can be really useful for certain compliance requirements. Yet another area of information to focus on is around information about the documents, the document metadata. And again, that falls into three categories. The system-generated information to do with creation dates and ID. Data which is used to create the document, but is not actually present in the document or the asset itself. And this can be very useful for certain downstream business processes. Obviously, there's a lot of information inside an asset, but sometimes the information that's not actually represented in the asset, but as part of the business workflow, can be really useful in other processes. And there's also information about the documents as well, things like cost to file if you need to track expenses related to them.
Yeah, let me add two points here, Carl. One is just to highlight, this is really just a sampling of the types of data we hear from our customers. Certainly, it's not all inclusive, and some of the customers or partners on the phone may have other use cases, either does not need to take advantage of this or have other types of data that the system could be extensible to. Separately, I just wanted to go back and highlight one point, as we hear again and again, that there's a number of analytical tools in the marketplace around financial services, but many of them really only have the ability to do analysis at the portfolio level. One of the unique aspects of Datalytics that we want to make sure we're highlighting is the ability to do analytics and analysis and reporting not only at the portfolio level, but really also at the individual asset or contract level. Thanks, Carl.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Before I leave this, there's another very important class of data that I should mention here, and that is the data that's actually inside the assets themselves. Very crucial information such as the term, interest rate, address, signatory names, and so forth. Information which is often inside of the assets, but not always readily accessible to all the systems and processes that need to be able to get at that. And so having that access to the information inside of your assets, about your assets, and about your transactions is really a very powerful offering, and that's the core of what Datalytics offers.
Yeah, for existing eOriginal customers and partners, it's important to note that where we're starting here in Datalytics is leveraging your existing Command Center home screen, existing single sign-on capabilities that you're used to today, and minimizing any learning curve that you and your users may have. And most importantly, it really is about building that single version of the truth repository for the loan documents and the underlying data and audit trail that Carl is referring to.
Hey, thanks, Brian. So starting from that very familiar place, the command center in the eOriginal system, let's take a look at some of that data. So now we've got data in the system, it's attached to our transactions and our assets. What can we do with it? Well, one thing that we can do is look at the dashboards that we've built here using various charts or table widgets and quickly scan over and get a feel for the information that we've got here. This is extremely useful if you want to quickly scan and look for outliers. And, that's the process that I'm going through here. Just looking at this chart, I can see something that wants a little bit more attention. And from here, directly from the user interface, I can click on this chart and immediately be taken down to the transaction level. And that's a very powerful capability. The system will automatically take me to, again, a very familiar part of Command Center that has information about the transactions and the assets contained, and I can drill straight into the documents from there. So this is a very streamlined, very effective workflow to be able to take a look at your assets, find anything that needs attention, and jump straight in and get all the full details. Now, another use that I mentioned to Datalytics is on the reporting side. And in this use case, I'm going to focus on responding to some findings in an audit or responding to an auditor's request. So again, from a very familiar place in the Command Center, I'm going to use a very familiar tool, and that's the query tool that's built into the user interface. And here I can build a very sophisticated set of searching criteria that will drill down and get me the exact transactions and documents that I'm interested in. Again, using a very familiar tool, the exact same interface that I would typically use in Command Center, I can sort the columns, I can select which columns are shown. If this is something that I do on a regular basis, then I can save this query and get access to this view very quickly. And that's actually what we can see in the middle left area there is a saved search that I've used for this. And the result that I'm looking for is something that, if I'm responding back to an auditor, I can give directly to them in a nice formatted table that has all the required data for the purpose, but also, very importantly, only the required data too. So this is an ideal way of sharing very succinctly and very securely exactly the information that an auditor may be requiring. And this very same technology can be used for other purposes as well. So if I need to produce regular due diligence reports, I use a very similar process. In fact, if this is something that I do on a periodic basis every week, every month, I can have the system schedule that to happen automatically and just let me know. It's great for supporting pre-close and post-close QC, really getting into the details of what's in the assets and how they correspond to expectations for that pool. And another very helpful way of using the system is to be able to export this information for other downstream processes. So in addition to having a PDF report, I could save this out for use in Excel or in a comma-separated value file format so that other systems could take this information and I could process it from there.
And just adding on to that, Carl, on the regular due diligence reports, as an originator, certainly to Carl's point, this can be used as a tool to provide those to potential investors or purchasers of a customer's paper. Also, you can provide access or visibility into the system if you have a regular buyer or set of buyers of your asset, giving them visibility earlier in the process, and again, accelerating that due diligence. And then one example that we've seen a lot of interest in the actionable export and downstream processes really is on the servicing side. Those loan servicers who really need access to that level of data and the data associated with the loans really helps in a number of different situations.
Right, thanks, Brian. Now, one more area that I'm going to focus on is around the auditing capabilities. For existing eOriginal users, a key value, and I'm sure something you're very familiar with, is the audit trail that gives me a complete picture of exactly what's happened to an asset. It's extremely important to demonstrate chain of custody around your transactions and your assets. That very same technology applies to all the data that comes in through Datalytics. So that, where data is updated, where when it was updated, all that information, which is very, very important to being sure of the integrity and the quality of the data, is all recorded in the same format of the audit log. And again, there are many rich ways of publishing that information to really give a lot of confidence that the information is accurate, it's high integrity, and it's exactly what an end user might require. Now, one more area that I want to stress is where that information stored in Datalytics, in the eOriginal system, is used to automate a fairly sophisticated business process. In this case, we're going to look at the example of running a compliance or quality assurance check. So, in the diagram we can see on the screen, we have the eOriginal vault, and we have some documents within that vault. So we have a selection of assets here. We're going to select those, and in this example, we're going to change the status of those transactions, and then we'll trigger automatically a compliance check. So as we change the status, that trigger is transmitted automatically by the system to a service that's listening for that event. So from that point, we've communicated to an external system which assets it needs to pay attention to, and is able to then read that information directly from Datalytics. And then we can process that information using whatever rich set of rules we might require. We can compare values of fields in Datalytics to certain standards. We could compare them against each other. We could make sure that data from two different sources that is meant to be the same really is the same. And that's very important for some types of asset classes where transactions originate from different places but need to be consolidated in order to complete a transaction. And we can make sure that data is actually present there. Again, that can really help from a compliance perspective. And really, there are limitless options for how, once you have the information from these transactions and these assets, you can create a very rich way of processing that information and making judgments. So from this point, our algorithms have made a decision, and it could be that an asset is in compliance or needs attention. And that information can be communicated back to the user in that standard format of the eOriginal command center. We could go back and we could set more data fields on those transactions or those assets, or we could be changing the status. Again, notifying the user, making it very clear within the system exactly what needs to happen next. Now, this general framework for being able to interface external logic with the data inside of Datalytics is really extremely powerful, and again provides limitless opportunities to do very sophisticated levels of automation and to really add a lot of value to a lot of business processes. So that's the essence of what Datalytics offers. So we've got, a very rich API for ingesting the information. We've got a very capable data management solution for managing that information. We have built-in dashboards and reporting capabilities that allow users to get a lot of value out of the information that's stored within the system. And we have a rich API for bringing that information into very sophisticated processes.
And just one point I wanted to highlight in some of the work we're doing in vehicle finance and mortgage and other industries around the robustness of the data. Oftentimes in the process, much of the data that's captured in the loan origination process is not passed on as it's not needed beyond closing. So in the case of mortgage, you have the MISMO data set that may be required for, the universal closing data set as an example, and we certainly can capture all that and pass it through. But importantly, there's also other data that really could be needed and valuable for audit, for servicing downstream, and so really we can marry together the MISMO data set, add to it other data captured in that loan origination process, and really providing value downstream, to the servicers and other parties in the system.
Great, thanks, Brian. So to summarize and look for next steps here, Datalytics, as I hope I've conveyed here, is a very powerful and sophisticated set of capabilities. So let's look at what it would take to actually apply this technology and this feature set to your own specific use case. And really there's two parts of this that we need to consider. There's the planning phase, getting ready to use Datalytics, and then there's the implementation side, and I'm going to touch on both. From a planning point of view, it's very helpful to sit down and do a little investigation into exactly what it is your use case for Datalytics will be. So understanding clearly what business benefits you're trying to derive, what business problems you're trying to solve, what process improvements you're trying to make, really helps drive a lot of the process. So being upfront and putting a little investment in that is definitely worthwhile. Having got the sort of business drivers, it's very helpful then to think about, well, how would Datalytics fit within your workflow? Where would the touch points be? It's very helpful also to spend some time thinking about the data that you want to capture and you want to use within your business processes. So what data in your electronic assets and your transactions do you want to capture so it can be used? And what about those transactions and assets is going to be useful as well? It's helpful to think about how that data is going to be captured, how it's going to be managed within the system, and how it's going to be reported or used by external systems. So it really helps to get down to the level of detail that you would expect around data schema, understanding the types of data that you're dealing with, and so forth. And as I say, Datalytics is very, very dependent on that data, which must be sourced from somewhere. So understanding exactly what the sources of your data are going to be and how the information is going to flow to Datalytics is a very important part of the process. And because that data flow is so crucial to making Datalytics work well for you, it's useful to think about how you're going to apply IT resources to make that integration, because Datalytics is really going to perform best when there is that automated flow of data from your source systems into Datalytics. Now, the alternative there is, of course, working with a partner who has already built an integration to Datalytics, in which case you may need much less involvement from your IT because that bridge will already have been built. From an implementation point of view, definitely we're here to help. There's a couple of ways that you can reach out to us, aside from all the normal mechanisms. We've set up a email address, pilot@eOriginal.com, specifically to support our customers and our partners as they start to implement Datalytics. So if you want to reach out to us through that channel, we can respond very quickly and see how we can help. Or, of course, you can talk with your normal sales contacts at eOriginal as well. We can provide technical support, we can provide technical information, we can help you as you're going through your business process analysis process and help make some recommendations on some best practices that we've seen. We can even help build the ROI case and the business case in order to make the investments so that you can start using these great benefits that Datalytics offers.
All right, well, thank you both very much. We've now entered our question and answer portion. And so far we have a few that have come in, so I'd like to get started with one for Carl. And the question is, why does my IT team need to be involved in the Datalytics implementation?
Okay, so in fact, I may have just answered that in my last few sentences, but I think the key part here is that IT involvement is very important to ensure that automated flow of data from your source system into Datalytics. That really is the first step in order to have a really trusted, secure source of data. So IT plays a role there, or as I mentioned, if you're working with a partner who's already built the bridge to Datalytics, then those requirements may be less.
All right, excellent. The second question I'll also send to you, Carl. When is Datalytics available?
Great question. So the Datalytics functionality is already deployed in our eOriginal servers in our data centers, so it's there and it's ready to go. We will have to turn it on a customer-by-customer and partner-by-partner basis as we get into those pilots. So that really does put the emphasis on reaching out to us either through your sales contacts or through the email address on screen here so that we can get that process started.
Excellent. I think this next one I will send over to Brian. How much is Datalytics?
Thanks, Sarah. Datalytics, we price based on relative to the number of transactions or capacity a customer processes in a year or a contract period. And it really is, for existing customers, it's really a derivative of currently what you're paying for a transaction for that additional value and capability. So rather than going through all the variants here, please reach out to us and we can respond with specifics to your situation.
Excellent. Okay. I think this will probably be our final question unless anything else comes through, and it is going to be directed at Carl. Is there any limit to how many dashboards a client would have, and would you suggest different functions like audit, compliance, and operations?
Sure. So within the dashboards, we have a whole selection of different types of charting features and table displays, so there's no real limit on how those apply. On a user-by-user basis, we can definitely tailor dashboards to specific use cases. So absolutely, you may have different dashboards for different types of users or different purposes, such as audit compliance versus somebody keeping an eye on operations versus other people that may be interested in other information.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today, and everyone on the phone. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Datalytics, and this will conclude our event.